Hey everybody, welcome back to this issue of Staffing Monthly, the industry's only digital publication that focuses on bringing you actionable insights, which is the original AI, in the areas of recruiting, marketing, sales, leadership, technology, and then we also demo great products and tools out there. And today we're focused in technology, and there's actually some key things that you should be considering or doing to help improve the value that you provide to your clients. And I'm actually welcoming back my friend Dan Mastropolo, who is the founder of Oak City Advisors, who is really an industry thought leader in the tech space. There are a lot of enterprise staffing companies and mid-market staffing companies that rely on Dan and his team at Oak City to implement the right technology to deliver better service to their clients. So Dan, just welcome back to Staffing Monthly. I'm glad to have you here.
Yeah, man. Thank you. As always, always excited to share a lot of the insight that we have. And, we are definitely touching a lot within the industry today. And another topic I'm really excited to talk to you about.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to get into this, man. Just picking your brain a little bit ahead of the interview. I think that you have great perspective on this. And I know that for the first time, what seems like in history, staffing has been adopting technology at a pretty rapid pace. Um, some in a good way, some not in such a good way, which I'm sure we'll get into, but I still see sales as one of the primary challenges. And I see a big disconnect between the value that we think that we provide and the value that our customers want. And just to set the table for our conversation and the audience out there, I view the three value drivers as price, unfortunately, but it is, we buy based on price, speed and convenience, if we can get something faster or more conveniently, that's value to us. And then obviously quality, so if
Yep.
we can get something of greater quality, that's value. So that's really the construct that I want to talk to you about and pick your brain on what you're seeing. And
Yep.
my first question for you is, considering the value driver of quality,
Yep.
what is a technology or maybe a tech-driven process that staffing agencies should be considering to be able to provide a better quality service to their customers?
Yeah. No. I think it's no joke. Most of us have seen. The power of automations is basically what's giving a lot of basically tech-enabled staffing companies the ability to either do things faster, have more control over user experience, both between customers and candidates, more that kind of marketplace driven kind of conversation. And really for me, what a lot of it boils down to is, it's pretty common that we expect the enterprise companies basically to have their own server architecture and be building a lot of custom technologies around basically, their large marketplace data, right? When you think companies, contacts, jobs, placements, things of that nature. However, the reality is moving a even mid-sized to SMB firm into their own server architecture is actually really inexpensive. It's only a couple $100 depending on size of the data and how much data they have within the firm. However, one of the biggest things that we've basically identified is companies all the time are basically being challenged to make changes to their tech stack. And when you're doing that and you're staying in these product to product worlds, it becomes very difficult for companies to really even understand the quality of the data that they're trying to manage. So, it's no joke, right? We all know AI this, AI that has been in the conversations really since COVID came out.
Yeah.
I joked around at ASG's conference this last week. I said, how many out of the 100 that were there, how many of you been pitched an AI product in the last 12 months? And everybody just laughed because it's every single person in the room, right?
You could have said the last
However,
12 minutes and they're
right. However, the reality is it's really difficult to drive automations when you don't understand the quality of the data that you are working with.
yeah.
And it's a really slippery slope the minute that you say go, and then you have no way of pulling that back. And you think a field is doing X and it's doing Y, right? And so, my biggest winning move for the clients that we've been working with is really helping them evolve into the server architecture, getting them more visibility to the data that's sitting not just in their main core operating systems, but a lot of the disparate systems that are basically, hodgepodged into their, overall stack. And really what that's driving for people is it's getting them more visibility to the business intelligence side of that to understand where is that data hygiene off? How can they get better accountability within the product marketplace partners? Because of the fact that we all know most product integrations were built to do very specific things. However, each system has an outside API doc that allows us to really understand the full power and the potential of what you can do through the power of automation.
Yeah.
But if you're not regularly spending the time with the data hygiene side of that, and most of us that are technology leaders have come into worlds with high volumes of tech debt that actually never got out of the way. And so, really trying to, get more visibility to that for our clients has been critical. But it's also really where, just like a regular kind of product rollout, typically a year or two into a relationship with us is where they really start seeing that bigger ROI, because it gives them a lot more power to now start doing things in their brand, their way, more custom type apps, and actually having more control over those automations, which typically is leading to a higher quality or a higher speed of delivery, with also being able to sell some exclusivity into what makes that firm very unique or special to the end.
And I love that. And I want to get into that speed or convenience thing, but there's two things that you said that I would appreciate if you could take the CTO hat off for a second.
Sure.
And speak to the non-technical leaders out there. The first one is when you say move to your own server architecture. I'd like the explanation around that. And then the other phrase that you use that I think is going to come up next is a product to product setup. So can you just kind of just briefly explain or touch on what those two things actually mean so people can grasp what you're laying out here?
Yeah, for sure. So most of us are comfortable with the world of Excel spreadsheets. Most of us probably even started firms off of
I
Excel
love
spreadsheets.
Excel. There's still a lot of companies that thrive on it.
They still do, right? But in reality, a server architecture is not much different than how you would treat that spreadsheet, right? Typically in a cloud server, basically you have things like AWS or Azure, things that you can go and purchase directly from them. And really all it's giving you is what we call kind of the SQL table, but it's really nothing more than an outline of how you would typically read those spreadsheets. Whatever you have in your headers, right, basically have, we call them entities, but that property value is something similar to like a company, a contact, a job. And in those core systems, each one of those have different data elements, right? And that basically really is what goes into this now cloud architecture. So for example, we do a lot with Aviante, right? Aviante has Bold. When we construct that into their own server, not meaning, Aviante Bold server, but like an actual firm server through an AWS or Azure, we're architecting that where Bold is basically a main folder. And then you have those companies, contacts, properties that basically now give you a lot more visibility to what data is actually sitting into those. And if you were just thinking, once again, Excel world, if I want to export that from the server, it's going to come out just like a spreadsheet of what these people are used to pulling into, the standard reports. The reality with that, though, is, you don't necessarily need a full CTO to manage that. You can do things with a product manager or, basically some system admin or anybody that really understands the way that data is supposed to be residing. But we help with that. So for our clients, a lot of times when we start a relationship with them, we're working with them most of the time. If they're Microsoft based, we're working with Azure. If they're Google based, we're using AWS or some hybrid of the two. And really, it's giving us the ability to connect those systems and actually get them the visibility to all that data that normally would have to be ran through a multiple series of reports. And a lot of times what we see is, when we start looking at those, people are going, well, man, object, property, 235 is actually, a key data element of what we call XYZ, right? And
Right.
it's like, for all of a sudden that decision got made 10 years ago. They haven't looked at it in 10 years. But think about that in the power of automation. You use things like a Sense or like a Bullhorn automation tool. That's how they've built all these mappings, right? And so it's like, how do you expect a firm to really truly adopt and utilize that tool if they don't really understand that architecture behind the scenes, right? And so,
Yeah.
a lot of times as we start to migrate into that, there's a process to basically get those systems in sync. However, we're using it as an education tool to a lot of the data teams or people that are supporting the data so that they actually can have better visibility to what actually resides there. And like I said, a lot of times these firms have been around forever. It's gone through multiple iterations of leadership.
Yeah.
And the deal. It's difficult for a firm to constantly be making a change every 2 years or 4 years because you're just restarting the cycle.
So brutal. Yeah, no, I get that. And so you were starting to move into the next value driver that I want to drive into is speed and convenience, because in today's world, like at the speed of business, which I think that's like an IBM slogan, ultimately our customers want more from us. They want it faster. They want it easier. They want all of that, which I attribute to being like the Amazon effect,
Yeah.
and that's what they want from us. And if we can't deliver it, they're going to either try to find someone that can or do it themselves. And now a lot of the tools out there might allow that, so what are some of the technologies out there or tech setup that is helping staffing agencies provide more speed and convenience to the candidate, to the client, both? What does that look like right now?
Yeah, like I'm really fortunate. Aviante's done a really good job this year of like really staying promoting and to being diligent about their API Plus program.
Yeah.
Bullhorn, most of the ATSs, under ERPs have a fairly robust API. Some are a little bit behind. However, the reality is every one of those, developer docs give you a lot more control over what you actually can either, get or push to those systems. What we use though beyond that is a lot of low code, no code tools like Zapier or Make. We primarily on the Oak City side work almost exclusively with Make, but
Yeah.
A lot of those basically are giving people marketplace opportunity that instead of having to go and build a lot of robust, integrations in code, it's a simple single sign-on to the external cloud software, right? So, things like Teams or Google Meet or Google Chat or, email or whatever the case may be. A lot of times through these, they're very inexpensive. You kind of put them behind basically the server architecture. And then once again, if it's something, a core principle, we do a lot of that type of stuff still in code or script or Lambda function. But when it comes to these more like team bases, like, believe it or not, we've worked with a lot of teams to actually re-architect their team structure in Microsoft. If you think about it, most people just keep dumping team channels or individual chats, and they don't think like something as simple of thinking through a branch structure and underneath a branch of a Teams channel, having a thing like sales and recruiting and compliance and HR. All those become really easy gateways to be able to watch the data, things that are really pressing, either from compliance related or things that we need to speed up between sales and recruiting teams or centralized teams, right? Like we can do a lot of those things through these low code, no code tools for under $100 a month, and now all of a sudden it's like, we're trying to evolve a lot of our clients into proactive management, where I feel like most of us that have been in the industry for a while know we're one of the most reactive industries out there. And a lot of it's driven because we're not just a one client, one fit shop. We're trying to do that, aggregated over multiple clients, and the clients drive a lot of our decisions, right? So by just standardizing a lot of those processes and understanding, like, I think you and I on the last, conversation we had talked a lot about controlled cost, right? How many of us basically are still in a world that the recruiting teams are calling every day? I want to spend more on a job board. I want to basically, now add another background vendor. I want this thing, right? Like any one of those things typically come with additional cost. And if we're not very methodical of where we have drop off in those processes, the next thing you know, you're liquidating thousands of dollars out of your margin when it can all be kind of controlled. And we're using a lot of tools like that to help really continue to drive, that proactive kind of monitoring, which then also helps us, basically protect our net incomes and some other things.
And so that's a great segue into like the last value driver of price, because right now I feel for a long time this industry has been hyper commoditized, and we've done it to ourselves. We don't do a very good job differentiating our agencies, connecting our UVP to the challenges of our ideal clients, and so on, so forth. And it leaves the client with really only price to differentiate us. So they just say, hey, and that's where they focus. And then poorly trained salespeople don't know how to negotiate against that. So we're left to compete at a lower price point. And that's one of the value drivers that the market is requesting right now. So can you expand a little bit further into how you can control those costs, or maybe use technology in a way, or have a tech infused process to really down cost the operational expenses that maybe increases capacity or whatnot, so we can actually compete at a lower price point for the customers and win more business that way, if that's your model?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to touch on a couple of things because I think it's always important to also like kind of keep everybody relevant of what we're probably seeing at more kind of the higher level of what's driving those prices, right? Too.
Yeah.
Reality is since COVID, basically, the rise of digital marketplaces has been astronomical, right? And so basically where a lot of people are going with that, right, is people will pay more money for basically the exclusivity of those talent, kind of communities. And obviously a lot of that, it's always been driven from the enterprise side, right? Most of the enterprise companies are getting a lot of the SOW, a lot of the RPO work. But just think about that from a pressure perspective on the traditional model. When you think about things that are going even into nearshore for BPO and virtual assistants and things of that nature, in conjunction with the rise of SOW and the more need for these specialized kind of programs to drive what we call that total talent management ecosystem, it's not shocking that we've had so much pressure on the traditional market.
Yeah.
So really where we go with that from a technology perspective is, I was fortunate enough last week to present on MSP, RPO, and SOW. And the reality of that is just like anything else, they're shiny object words that essentially drive the actual, like, basically engagement of a database that makes us unique, right? The more that we have a specialty like CDL or say lumping or healthcare or whatever the case may be, it gets a lot easier to get yourself into those conversations. But then there's a deliverable that comes with it, which means you need to have the technology first. You need to be able to showcase that you have those engagement layers to be able to actually have an engaged talent pool, not the staleness of the traditional database, which once again, it's tied back to people just always wanting to spend money on top of the funnel versus actually putting time and effort into actually, converting what you already spent money in.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the things that we're doing, once again, outside of basically moving into that cloud architecture, is really focused around that engagement layer, right? Being able to, do things more in the gamification community of, how do we keep these people redeployed, and how do we incentivize things like referrals, and how do we actually put the focus back on the talent that is allowing us on the sales channel to go sell that exclusivity. The minute that we start to break into there, now all of a sudden we're equally building towards total talent, meaning it's not just a one size fits all. It's, I have a traditional model, I can play in the SOW, I can bring a marketplace to those equations. And then once again, a big piece is a lot of what we're seeing is people are moving more to centralized recruiting, services or centralized recruiting teams. And so we call them personally in certain instances funnel teams, right? But the funnel teams are able to handle a lot more of this volume type stuff. And also keep up with those engagement elements. Plus, it's also driving a lot of reduction in the SG&A cost of the business because we're not now so saturated in brick and mortar. We have the ability to actually save a lot of cost there. However, it does beef up now the need to stay very highly compliant. And to really stay compliant is like a lot of what you hear me saying is helping people move into this more proactive compliance approach. So if you think about a lot of these systems have pipelines or, ways that you basically submit a candidate for an interview, but most of the time in the pipeline, that's really all of our pre-compliance, items. It's, your onboarding, it's the recruiting time, it's getting people through drug and background, W-4s, I-9s. The reality is if you take time to really look at the processes there, most of the systems give us what we call event webhooks that on a change of a status, we're able to kind of really keep up with that technically. That's where we're basically starting to bring a lot of that forefront to the finance teams, the compliance teams, because the reality, just think about it like this. If let's say, for example, your process today is, let's make an offer, move somebody to onboarding, instantly run a background, instantly run a drug test to get them almost to like a fully vetted, ready for placement kind of status. There's a lot of people that fall off in those steps, either from ghosting or failures. If you take time to put your approve and decline reasons behind that, and then you also use that webhook to get into those financial groups, it's very easy to start seeing patterns of where you are actually wasting cost. All right, so I'll use an example. We had a big CDL staffing company we work with out of Arizona. We did a case study around why were we losing so many people in background? We actually weren't losing them in the background. We were losing them because of the motor vehicle. So through that analysis, we actually pushed the motor vehicle up to almost like the prerequisite before a full, DOT background. That's a difference of $60 or $6 versus 90, right? So now it's like, if I lose 90% of my people off a $6 cost versus 90, how much money did we just put back into the bottom line just by a simple kind of thing like that? We see those patterns pretty regularly, and people just don't watch it. They get the bill, they pay the bill, and they just move on, right? So it's a lot of those little
cost of business, and it doesn't
exactly. It doesn't have to be.
Great example.
So it's like, a couple months of monitoring that, we brought net income pretty up substantially, but like also think about that from the talent experience, right? Why would somebody want to go through the painstakingness of, a full background, a drug test, the physical at the, facility, right? Like that's asking a lot of people for time that we don't pay them for, right? And essentially it's just a terrible experience when people do all that and then can't land to a job.
They get knocked out at the MVR stage. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's smart, and it really is a good way to look at it and basically quantify monetarily the cost at each step, because wherever your leakage is, that cost doesn't necessarily go away. It just has to it erodes your margin. That it basically stacks to your total cost per placement. And if you can rework that process the way that you just outlined and actually minimize your costs as it relates to leakage in the candidate process, you're going to increase your margins without even having to do really anything other than just pay attention to the data and make a decision. That's smart.
Yeah.
So smart.
Yeah, for sure. So
Awesome.
it was a really cool experience to go through that. We've definitely seen some patterns of those types of things. And then the other thing that it's always fun too is like, we're starting to see a lot of people start now navigating into like seeing things in the brain, which, once again, that server gives you the ability to really stack your own user experience on top of. So, the ones that are staying with us for years, we're starting to mature into that. And once again, it just is helping them now start being relevant into a lot of these kind of more, like kind of RPO or SOW type conversations, because, they can actually showcase what that experience will be like. So it's to me, that's the way the world's moving. It's definitely the trends we see in the BPO space and things of that nature. And it's always been part of the RPO model.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that really, when you look at the sectors that are growing the fastest, meaning what our clients are buying, it is that platform staffing model where you got exclusive access to that marketplace. It's also the MSP model, that the aggregator that kind of uses centralization to optimize cost, and they are measuring performance to make sure they're getting the best ROI. And if traditional staffing can't keep up with those two models, then it's going to get left behind.
It will. I mean, just look at the job and talent story. I mean, like it's unbelievable what they've done from funding and stuff like that this year. And, it's a lot of what they're bringing to market. So I mean, it's definitely one we're paying a lot of attention to. And, it's been fun to help kind of get more of that SMB mid-market almost to those levels with certain things, because it does definitely make them relevant against those solutions.
I love that, man. I love that. I appreciate your time. And if anyone wants to reach out to you or Oak City to kind of get a tech audit, just to see, kind of where do they stack up and, how can they improve? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, not a problem at all. You can get us through the Oak City LinkedIn page. That comes directly to me and the sales team. You can also go to oakcityadvisorsllc.com. That link is also on our LinkedIn page, and there's a connect with us page. Either one of those, you can definitely reach out to me and be happy to do.
Sweet. I'll get that all right on the page, man. Dan, glad to have you back. I appreciate you concisely sharing that insight with the group. I'm sure they got a lot of value out of that, and hopefully we'll prepare them for the next wave of technology that we're embarking on.
Yeah, excellent, man. Always appreciate the time with you. Let me know if I can do anything else.